the steps, when we get to this place, we did our introduction, and then we did the first 3 steps, and then last week we did steps 4 and 5, and we got to look at the forgiveness piece, which is just so important to me. That was just a life change, for me, when I got that imparted to me at the end of my 5th step. And the steps pick up pace now. We really crank through the rest of these. And I want you guys to know a couple of things. Number one, I recognize that a lot of this on the surface can seem somewhat controversial. This method of going through the steps really quick. This is the way it was done in the 1940s. And I'm not suggesting, please, I am not suggesting that anybody that goes through the steps in any form or fashion you do is not, you are a hero to me. And I'm not saying that this is something that we all need to start doing or change the way. I'm just saying there are some little pieces of this that we might be able to learn from, take away from, and it might enhance the way that we're able to sit with newcomers. And it certainly has been effective, for me. So I wanted to go back just to make sure if anybody has missed any of the first sessions, I wanted to spend just a moment to just sort of rehash. And Reed was really great to point out that at the end of the 5th step, now I'm in your big book. You're going to need your big book, and you're going to need your highlighter, and you're going to need a pen. And then you're going to be making a few little notes, especially when we get to step 9, there's some notes, and Reed's going to help us with that. But if you'll remember that we did on page 75 in your book, the 3rd paragraph, the paragraph in the middle of the page, if you'll recall, that was where we ended up. That was what we call the 5th step promises. It gave us a couple of sentences about doing the 5th step, and then it gave us all those wonderful promises that were going to come true. And I told Reed that I thought that in beginning this, we might look back at those first few steps just ever so briefly. And Reed pointed out that, well, that's exactly what the book says. And dadgummit, he was right. If you look at the last paragraph on page 75, right after we have ended the 5th step promises, it says, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. And so that's what I think we ought to do. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down from the shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything. And so let's look back at that. Let's make sure that we haven't omitted anything. In the first step, the first 3 steps are our surrender. And in the very first step, if you will recall, painting with a really wide brush, we said, we looked at the hopelessness of the life that we had been living. It was in the very, very first paragraph that we read. And so we talked about, taking the steps from the point of view of hopelessness so that the journey that we were on would be inclusive for everybody. And after we explored our powerlessness and we looked at unmanageables and we raised our hands to identify different pieces of that, the question was asked if we were at a place in our life where we were ready to admit that we had a problem that we had not been able to solve on our own. And that got a resounding agreement. And I agree. And then we talked about spirituality in the second step. If you'll recall, we indicated that you didn't have to believe. And that was a big thing for me. When I read the second step, I didn't read it correctly. I thought it said that I had to believe that there was a power greater than myself. And it didn't say that at all. It said I had to come to believe. And in the dialogue, it indicated that I just needed to be willing to believe. And my sponsor asked me the very disarming question. He asked me if I believed that he believed. And of course, I had to say that I did believe that he believed, because there he was sitting with me at a coffee shop for nothing. You know, I mean, here it was a Saturday. He was taking out his own time that to take me through this process, which to me created a crisis of belief. You know, why is this man doing this? Why is he taking up his valuable time to sit with me? And the only conclusion I could come up with was he must absolutely really believe this works. A crisis of belief sunk in with me, and we moved right into the third step and did the third step prayer together. Then he told me I was going to start doing an inventory. And we did the inventory in 3 ways, according to the big book. Had me make a list of the things I was angry at. I'm so glad that they start with that, because the stuff just flows out of me right then. You know, what am I? Oh, let me just tell you all of the terrible things that have happened to me, all of the injustices of life that have occurred toward me. So I list all the things I'm angry at. Then it gets more serious as I list all the things I'm afraid of. And then I list the people I have hurt. And therein is where then my character defects start to come out. But my sponsor was great. If you recall, we talked about the personal inventory being akin to a business inventory. And remember, we also talked about a business inventory. You better not just count the things you want to get rid of. You better count the things you want to keep. So we looked at assets and liabilities, character assets, character liabilities. And it took my sponsor to point out to me that I was a generous man and that I had, in fact, helped people in my life. And of course, I had done some bad things too, but we looked at both, and which was helpful to me, because in the 7-step prayer, we're going to surrender, you know, good and bad. And if I don't know what the good is, I don't know what I'm surrendering if I'm only done that liability side of the inventory. Nonetheless, I shared my inventory with my sponsor, and that was then the 5th step. And that brings us to where we are today, you know. So on page 75 is where we finished up. And one thing that you can note, you know, we've been up till now making little notes in our book. Remember, we've been, because the steps, especially in the first 3 steps, was jumping around different passages. Well, when the authors of the book got to the 5th step, they finally got sober too. And all the passages go linearly now. So they stop jumping around. So even the authors, I mean, not only are we getting sober, they got sober. We should like stop and celebrate right there. So the passages are going to go linearly now. There's not much need to make too many more notes about that. So we finished on 75. So turn over to page 76. And if you will find, get your highlighter, and 3 lines down from the top of the page, here's what the big book has to say about step 6. It says, are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can he take them all, every one? That's what the big book has to say about step 6. And this is one of those points, you know, where I say, thank God for the 12 and 12, you know, to give us a little more meat about that. But taking it, which wasn't published until the 50s, so taking it the way they did it in the 1940s and just looking at that, I'm going to ask you the 6-step question. Now that we've done our inventory, now that we've shared our inventory, now we're aware of the things that we're ready to let go of. So I'm going to ask you this question, and all that is required of you is to answer out loud with a yes or a no. And because everybody's muted, give me a wave. So here's the question. Are you guys now ready to let God remove from you All the things which you have identified are objectionable. Can he take them all, every one? What's your answer? Can I get a wave, a thumbs up? Thank you for that. Well, everybody that waved, thumbs up, said yes, gave it digitally, thank you, Tom, then we've all taken the sixth step. It's just that easy. And once I said that with my sponsor, we jump down to the next paragraph. And this is the seventh step prayer. And so it says, if you'll notice, highlight this, when ready, we say something like this. And if you guys would like to do the seventh step, take the seventh step actually, the same way I did with my sponsor, if you guys will say this with me and highlight as we go, my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. And then if you'll notice, right after that, it says, we have then completed step 7. So boom, right there, we've just done step 6 and 7. It's just like that. And many of us in our prayers in the morning, as we're asking God to keep us sober, will also recite sometimes the 3rd and the 7th step prayer and others, which I find to be immensely helpful. Now, I want to remind you of something. When we did, if you will recall, that when we go way back to the 4th step, and if you'll look back on page 69, this is a passage that you guys already highlighted, but go back to page 69. And if you will remember, find the last full paragraph on page 69 and the second sentence in that paragraph. Do you guys recall when I ask you to highlight, we must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. And we had identified, I had asked you guys at that point, when you were looking at your inventories, and especially the harms part of your inventory, I had asked you guys the kind of the what if question. And I said something along the lines of, what if by some miracle, the people on your inventory were to magically show up? Is there anybody on your inventory that you would be willing to tell them you were wrong and you were sorry and you want to make it right? I'd ask you just to circle those on your inventory at that time. And so by doing so, of course, I would have pointed out, we don't go out and do anything. It's just, who would you be willing to do that with? And so flip back with me, back to page 76, right where we left off with step 7. And I put a little line there right after we have then completed step 7. I make a little mark right there to let me know that we just did step 7 and we're immediately going to go into steps 8 and 9. And so the big book says, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. It says, let's look at steps 8 and 9. And then it tells us exactly what about step 8. And here's what it says. It says, we have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. Well, that's all it says about step 8. And if you notice, it says it in the past tense. So those names that you circled when you did your harms part of your inventory back then, that's your 8-step list. So you actually already have your 8-step amends list. You made it when you did your 4th step. So congratulations, the authors of the big book tricked us and they already had us do step 8 without telling us. Thanks a lot. I feel kind of violated, but I'm going to get over it. I'm just going to say, there you go again. The alkies tricked us again. Thanks so much. Thank you, Bill. Okay, so then if you will skip a sentence now, oh, and congratulations on doing step 8, since you've already done it. Well done, everybody. So now we're going to jump right into step 9. And this is where, I don't know if you guys, when I was first getting sober and I looked at the steps and I was kind of going down the steps going, yeah, okay, check. I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. And boy, when I read down to step 9, I thought to myself, oh boy, now here's where the process gets serious. But I want you to know that I was making, in my head, I was making step 9 way too complicated. The way it was done in the 1940s is way easier than I imagined. And I want you to know that we're going to read the passages in the big book, but the methods that were applied come from Wally Patton, the author of Back to Basics. And what Wally did was, when he was doing the research on the beginner meetings of the 1940s, way back when, he wanted to identify as many people as he could find who got sober in the 1940s and by using this method. And he also endeavored, he wanted to find as many people as he could find who were sponsored by Dr. Bob. And he interviewed each one of them in recording, and all of the recordings of all the individual interviews are in the Back to Basics archives at Wally's home, is where it is, in Tucson, Arizona. He identified close to 100 individuals who got sober in the 1940s and or were sponsored by Dr. Bob. He interviewed them, and what he discovered to a person is what we're getting ready to go over. Now, first, we're going to read the passages, and then I'm going to tell you the method that was applied. So if you will look at your book on page 76 and skipping a sentence from where we stopped on step 8, you see where it says, now we go out to our fellows. Everybody see that? So highlight right there. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember what the big book, every time the big book says the word ask, what does it mean? It means pray. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Do y'all see the squiggly writing there? Do you see the italics right there? I want you to know how important the italics are in the big book. So anytime you see italics, I want you to, you know how cheap we are? I mean, we can be extravagant, we can be overly extravagant at times, but then we can squeeze blood out of a nickel. You know how we are? Well, the alkies back then were the same way. I mean, and of course, they could barely afford enough money to publish the whole big book. But in the 1940s, and the big book was published in April of 39, anytime that you had italics in a book, you had to pay extra for it, because they had to go and get a different set of squiggly letters, and they had to retypeset the page with squiggles in order to print the page. And so just think about it this way. Anytime you see squiggly letters in the big book, remind yourself that the alkies had to pay extra for squiggly letters. And we don't pay extra for much of nothing. I don't know. That's just me. But anyway, so italics was very important to the alkies in the 1940s. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of the some of the passages in the big book that discusses step 9. So turn over to page 77, and I want you to find 4 lines down from the top of the page. And it's going to talk about how we shouldn't just, I don't know about you guys, but I wanted to really, at this point, I really wanted to stay sober. And I was ready to run out and just go tell people. I was ready to start oversharing. I was ready to just run up to people in the line at Walmart and say, you probably don't know me, but I probably am damaged you, and because I was pretty damaging, and so I was gonna, can I buy your produce for you? I mean, I was just nuts. I was pretty crazy at this point. And the big book warns about us, taking on this spirituality and cloak ourselves, in a bunch of nonsense. So on page 77, 4 lines down from the top, highlight with me, it is seldom wise to approach an individual who smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message, but our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries. Underline demonstration of goodwill. This is a theme that we're going to see repeated, that what the big book is going to tell us, it's way more important than what we do than what we say. It was pointed out to me early on, my sponsor would say, how you doing? How you doing on your inventory? And I would say, well, I was thinking a lot about it. And he would say, there's no chapter in the big book into thinking. There is one into action, they point out. So it's not about thinking, it's not about talking, it's really about action. Okay, so then I want you to jump down from there. It's going to talk about making amends to people we don't like. So if you'll jump down about 8 lines from there, and do you see where it says nevertheless? Do y'all see that? Start highlighting. Nevertheless, with the person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to who? We're doing this for us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. And then I want you to, now we're going to talk about financial amends. Turn over to page 78 and find the 3rd paragraph. It's right in the middle of the page. And it starts with one of the great understatements of the big book. It says, most alcoholics owe money. This is shocking. Shocking, I tell you, yeah. Most alcoholics owe money. We do not dodge our creditors, telling them what we are trying to do. We make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory that it might cause financial harm. That was one that Dr. Bob's big fear of doing his 9th step was that he would no longer get referrals for his surgery, and the truth of it was that's actually what happened. Dr. Bob lived in abject poverty. His surgery practice really did dry up after he went around and made amends to folks. And but thanks to the benevolence of the people in AA, he was able to live comfortably, and he even had enough money to buy the convertible that he had wanted all his life too. So approached, we're going to continue in the big book, approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we're liable to drink if we're afraid to face them. I know that one of my sponsees had gotten in trouble with the IRS. I was early in recovery myself, and of course he was really early in recovery, and he had not filed a tax return for about 5 years. And so when I was taking him through the steps and we get to this point, and I was like, gosh, I think we're going to need to really look at that. And he said, yeah, I'm going to get to it. And I brought it up again. And he said, yeah, I'm thinking about it. And I brought it up again. And he said, yeah, I'm going to have to really look at that one of these days. And so I got so concerned, I went to my sponsor and I said, I'm worried about this guy. If he doesn't take care of this, he's liable to drink over this, And my sponsor said two great things. The first one he says was, well, I don't think he's in enough pain. And when he's in enough pain, he'll look at it. And then number two, he said, I think you need to go to Al-Anon. And so that's when I started going to Al-Anon. and thankfully, because Al-Anon, I stopped mentioning it to the guy, and almost a year went by. And I'd never said it again. He never mentioned it. But after a year, he comes to me and he says, I think I need to look at that income tax thing. And I said to him, I think you're a genius. I think that's perfect timing. He ended up gathering all the back stuff, and he did a disclosure with the IRS. He got a payment plan arranged. And he said that the lady down at the IRS office was just the nicest lady to him, which I found amazing. And he went down to go sign the papers. And I said, well, after you go down and do that, if you're feeling a little squirrely, just call me after you get done, and we'll take your temperature. He called me after he went down to see the lady in the IRS. And he said, I was sitting at her desk and something came over me. And he said, for some reason, I just said, ma'am, I just wanted to tell you that I wasn't purposefully trying to avoid paying taxes. He says, I'm an alcoholic. And my drinking got so bad, I just kind of lost track of everything. And I'm just so grateful to you. And thank you for helping me arrange this payment. I'm planning on paying everything I owe. He said, the lady put down her pen and she says, you're an alcoholic? She says, did you go to treatment? He said, yeah, I went to treatment. She said, did you pay with a credit card? He said, yeah, paid with a credit card. She says, you need to go get that statement because we have dispensations for people with alcoholism. We can redo this. She said, did you go to liquor stores? He said, yes. She said, did you pay with the credit card? He said, yes. She said, you need to find your credit card receipts because we have dispensations for alcoholics. I had to pull over. He's calling me, telling me this. I had to pull over on the side of the road. And the first thing I thought was, I wonder what meetings that lady goes to. You can't, I promise you, you can't make this stuff up. When we put ourselves in God's hands, we're dealing with spiritual energies here. And it's amazing, just amazing what happens. Okay. So back to the big book, over on page 79, find the third paragraph. And it's going to talk about don't rush ahead of yourselves. Don't be hasty. Don't be foolish. Third paragraph, usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. And then page 80. very first line on page 80, it talks about how we need to be prayed up, sponsored up, meeting up before we go jump ahead to make an amends. So page 80, very first line, before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, ask God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. And then flip over to page 82. I want you to find the second paragraph on page 82, and I want you to find the last sentence in that paragraph. This is just brilliant. Second paragraph, page 82, last sentence. Do you see where it says good generalship? You'll see that? Highlight right there. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk of face-to-face combat. We're not going to go running around going nose to nose with everybody we've hurt. Sometimes that could be foolhardy. And then skip a sentence and highlight. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Certainly he must keep sober, for there'll be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he has so shockingly treated. And then top of page 83, very first line, yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it. That's a great line. We're going to be looking back at that. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it. Which brings me to a good point, just briefly. So the word amend, the root of the word amend is to mend, or to, in Mississippi vernacular, to fix or to repair. And so when you sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as you now see it, when you sit down to have a conversation, when you make an apology, does that really repair anything? If I were to steal Reed's car and drive it off a cliff that's so prevalent on the ride between Asheville and Pavillon, there's a lot of these little windy roads. And if I was to drive that car off one of those windy roads and I staggered back to Reed and I said to him, I am so sorry. From the bottom of my heart, I apologize. I mean, I really apologize. No. I mean, really apologize. I haven't fixed anything. He still hadn't got a car. And until I get him a car, I have not repaired. So I don't want us to think, and it was pointed out to me to make sure that I didn't think, as important as apologies are, and they are immensely important, I didn't need to delude myself to thinking that an apology was an amend. Does that ring true? It's important to do. I had a lot of apologizing I needed to do, but I didn't need to think in terms of that being really, that's not fixing anything. And that's the root of the word amend. All right. So then I want you to skip down to the next paragraph. So I'm in the second paragraph on page 83. It says, the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. There's those squiggly again. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. Underline that. That is money. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. It's not words that fix anything. It is action. It is what we do, not what we say. And then the next line, we must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. And then the very next line is talking about the letters. It says, there may be some wrongs we cannot fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. Okay, now, so those are all the key passages that were used to do step 9 out of the big book. This next part, I need you to write this down. So based on what we read and based on the interviews that Wally did with the close to 100 people that had gotten sober in the 1940s, and as many as he could find who got sober with Dr. Bob, there were 4 ways that they made amends. And thank you, Reed, for putting this over in the chat for us over here. So the first one is the first type of amend. This is 4 types of amends. The first one was direct amend. So a direct amend, of course, is going nose to nose, knee to knee with somebody. This is what I did. This is how I'm going to fix it. Now, in the 1940s, the only time they did direct amends was for financial reasons, when there was money to be paid. And the way it was explained to me is because they didn't have the money to pay it back, whatever they owed, they had to arrange a payment plan. And so they had to sit down with the person and arrange a payment plan. So they had to go knee to knee, nose to nose with people to make those direct amends. So next to direct amends in the 1940s, that was only done for financial reasons. Now, remember that we ought to sit down with the family and other people close to us and analyze the past as we now see it. So this doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk to people. We should apologize. We should sit down, but we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that that is an amend. It's important. We should do it, but not think in terms of it being an amend. So that's the first one, was a direct amend. The second one was a living amend. A living amend where they changed the way they lived. And the way they went about changing the way they lived is something that we talked about way back in the beginning when we did the first step. Remember, there were 3 activities, 3 things we did. And if we did these 3 things, our lives would change. The first one of which we prayed on our knees and asked God to keep us sober. The second of which was we attended those meetings. We needed to be conspicuously absent if we aren't attending. We needed to attend more than we don't attend, for sure. And, and it was pointed out, you can't be a member of a fellowship that you don't attend. And the third thing that we needed to do was we needed to share from the heart. We needed to tell the truth, the good and the bad, about what's going on inside of us. We needed to be transparent with the people that we love and the people in recovery that we are in recovery community with. So we pray, we attend those meetings, and we share from the heart. And if we do that, then we are repairing what's broken. And what's broken is us, me. I was broken. I needed to be spiritually fit. And by doing those things, I started showing up for my family. I started telling the truth. I didn't need to hide anymore. I didn't have anything I needed to hide because my stories were out. And I started I started living the kind of life my family wanted me to live. The third kind of an amend that was done in the 1940s was called an in-kind, IN-KIND, an in-kind amend. And this is a substitutionary amend. This is a something where you can't. Oh, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine had done some damage to a school and it really bothered him. And it was something that the school no longer existed. He couldn't fix what was the damage that he had done. And so because of that, it bothered him. And that's the key to this thing, was it bothered him. And so he became a volunteer at another school in order to substitute, in order to make what he felt like was an amend. I'll give you another example. I do this workshop in prisons. Haven't been able to do it in person in a long time. I've done some Zooms, but I've been going around Mississippi and do this workshop with the people in prison. And I tell the guys there that the difference between me and the men or the women that I do this with is I didn't get caught. If drinking and driving 3 times is a felony, then I've committed 50 felonies and I didn't get caught. And so I do that workshop for them as a way of me making an amend, for what I've done. That's an in-kind amend. So the last one is letters. Now, this is interesting. The big book talks about writing letters to those who cannot be seen. But here's the thing. In the 1940s, they did not mail those letters. This is to a person that Wally identified. They did not. The way they did it in 1940s is when they had a relationship that was broken and damaged, and it wasn't appropriate to contact the person, either they've moved on or whatever, they would write the whole thing out. They would write about their regret. They would write about what happened. They would write about what they wished had happened. And then they would take the letter, they put it in an envelope. They put the person's first name on the envelope with no address, no return address, and no postage, and they dropped them in mailboxes. And it went to where it needed to go, and I believe right to their own heart. So 4 ways they made an amends. They made direct amends when they needed to make financial amends. They changed the way they lived by praying, attending meetings, and sharing from the heart. If they had things that really bothered them, they might do a substitutionary in-kind amend. And let me tell you, they wrote tons of letters that they never mailed. And I dare say that when I do this workshop, I'd say that just about most of us might have a letter in us somewhere that maybe we need to write, and maybe we need to read to our sponsor, but I'm going to tell you, don't keep it. Don't keep it. Now, there's 2 promises I need y'all to make. So raise your right hand. Raise your right hand. I need you to raise your right hand. Okay. Yeah. And repeat after me. I promise to never text an amend. Okay. I just need to, we don't text amends. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. I just did. And then one more, Tom, thank you for giving me the hands up. Right. So this is the second one. Okay. Raising your right hand, everybody. Repeat after me. I promise to never make an amend without talking it over with somebody first. Right. So, I'm the one that created the damage. I can't go running out trying to, repair things without talking it over with somebody. If I've got damaged relationships and I want to go out and do a repair job, I'm clever, I'm pretty clever. I'm from Mississippi, but I'm clever. And, there's no way for me to go out and make that amend unless I talk it over, because I have the tendency to bury the hook, deep down in that amend. You know what I'm talking about? Because I've got an outcome in mind. And one of the things that we don't do in recovery is we don't do outcomes, right? Me making the amend at where there's a damaged relationship is I give away the power. Remember how powerless we are? I need to give away because I don't know where the relationship's going to go after I go tell what I've done. And I go tell what I've done. And then I got to wait and see what the other person says about where we're going to move forward in the relationship, right? So 4 ways that we do amends in the big book, and I want you to know that it's a whole lot easier. It's a whole lot easier than I think, than any of us ever thought, right? And so that kind of brings us to the whole thing. I'll just by show of hands, how many of you looking at the amends in this 4 ways, isn't this doable? Isn't this doable? Isn't this something that we can do? We really can. We can change the way we live. And I want to say, what is the people that love us the most? The people that love us the most, what do they really, really want? They want me to do better. They want me to start living the life of a sober person. They want me to stop getting arrested, and showing up drunk at everybody's wedding. They want me to stop waking up in some, I was a blackout drinker, which is like time travel. I'd drink on Friday and come to on Sunday in some unknown county. And, I mean, they want me to stop all that. They want me to live the kind of life that I was supposed to live. And by doing those living amends, that's what my family wanted. They wanted me to do better. And that's the commitment that I was able to make. And it's a slow process, right? But I'm going to tell you, it's something that we implement right at the beginning, and we start doing those amends right at the beginning. So God bless you guys. I'm so thankful to all of you for this. I want you to be let's try not. I try not to scare newcomers, with the amends process. I want them to know that this is gonna be okay. They're gonna work through it. I promise. If we will just work on ourselves and do the best we can, write those letters, explore the things that really break your heart that we need to repair. And if that's the case, there's a letter in there somewhere. Make the financial amends we need to make and change the way we live. That's the way it was done in the 1940s. Well, guys, I want to open this up. Reed, I'd like to know if this is very controversial. I know it's very different. I know. And you guys might have questions, comments, observations, or just, I'd love to hear anything you guys have to say about doing your 9th step. Yeah, because if Wes, we started that process, in the first step, in the very, very first step, the very first thing my sponsor said to me was, if I wasn't willing to pray, and ask God to keep me sober, that this thing wasn't going to work. Not that it wasn't going to work, it's just that he wasn't going to be able to help me. It was like this. He called it the single most important thing I was ever going to be able to do. So right there. And then he was real big on this meeting attendance thing. And then he was asking me these profoundly confusing questions like, how was I feeling? I was like, well, I don't, I'm not really sure, that I don't know. What do you mean by that? And so we're already, this process began right at the beginning. So by the time we get to the 9th step, we've already been working this stuff. But I agree, Wes. I think you're right. I think the living amends is the most important one. Yeah, well, we pray and ask until it comes. You know, it's something that we're going to continue to be prayerful about. And I'll give you a story about that, Leon. You know, my sponsor was living on Long Island when he got sober, and he was taken through this method. They didn't call it back to basics. They just called it the way they were doing the steps, you know, on his home group on Long Island, I guess this goes back 30 years ago or more. And, uh, and so, you know, his sponsor told him, he had this relationship that, you know, he said that he would be willing to make an amends. The sponsor said, well, you know, I just want to make sure you'd be willing if you ran into her. And my sponsor told his sponsor that, well, there's no way I'm ever going to run, you know, I'll be willing to make amends, but she lives in Mississippi, and I'll tell you, I'm never going back there. And so he said that his sponsor just told him, listen, all you do is just, if you'll remain willing, then we let God, you know, arrange these things, you know. And so, but I hear what you're saying, Leon. You know, you got the one that you're just absolutely trapped and just unwilling to do. Then I'll work with the guy and just say, well, then let's do the ones you are willing to do, you know, and let's just pray and just see if down the road your heart doesn't get softened. The story of my sponsor was he went on a business trip to Key West, and he was walking out of his hotel to go to a 12-step meeting before his first business appointment. And he's walking down and he sees the lady from Mississippi. And he asked her if he could go buy her a cup of coffee because he had some things he wanted to tell her. And they became great friends. And he ended up moving to Mississippi. That's how I met him. She set up a Buddhist dojo, and we would all sit and meditate together and chant in Japanese. You can't make this stuff up. He told me I was forgiven. And then he said, because then he needed to explain to me how the forgiveness piece worked. And the way he said it was, the way forgiveness works, he says, I promise you one thing. He says, the people in the meetings that you're attending, he says, they all forgive you, you know. And then he said, I'm going to tell you another one. The people in the rooms of recovery all over this planet, they all forgive you. He said, I forgive you, but most importantly, God forgives you. And then he repeated it. And then he said, and God forgives you because you're a good man. You are good men and women who have suffered under the lash of a terrible disease. And in some cases, it's somebody else's disease. And in some cases, it's both, right? And that caused us to do a lot of things we wouldn't have done if it hadn't have been that way. And because of that, we are forgiven. You know, here's the thing is that, you know, not everybody in our life is healthy. You know, I mean, some of the healthy people, and maybe I should start saying it this way, it's the healthy people in our lives that want us to just do better. But the unhealthy people in our life, you know, sometimes can use this against us. They can overly probe. But here's one of the things I want us to everybody make firm this statement. We didn't get sober to become doormats for anybody. Dadgummit, we own up to what we did, but we don't let anybody rub their feet on us. I'll tell you what, I will not stand for it, you know? And so I don't owe people an explanation of what I thought or what I did or why I did what I did. And I love what you said. This is not helpful to you handled that perfectly. Perfectly. I couldn't have drawn it up any better. And I'll say right now, and I'd give you a hug if I could right this second, because you are a strong woman in recovery and you hold on to what you're doing. You're living this principle life. And by dingy, we did some stuff that we regret, but dang it, I'm not going to have my nose rubbed in it anymore because I'm standing firm on this, that I live by spiritual principles now. And that's the way it is. And anybody that doesn't like that, that's too bad. See you next week.